And we're live. Welcome to you, the viewer. Welcome to our fantastic panel. It's the After Dram, and that means it's time to unwind. So put your feet up, grab a dram or two, and relax. And as a quick recap to our early afternoon, Dave, Jason, Nick, Drew, Sheila, and I have done a deep dive into the first third of this book right here. A Glass Apart, Irish Single Pot Still Whiskey by Fionnan O'Connor. And if you haven't gotten the book, buy the book, but try to get the original version, which is bigger. We like the original version. That's a better one. And I got to say, it was fun. It was educational. But we're going to right now do another quick round of introductions and tell us what's in your dram now. And we're just going to leave it on here. I'm not going to make it all large. So, Dave, start us off, please, sir.
All right, it's Yukon Dave coming from the basement, and I still have the same two whiskeys I had earlier today. I have my Yellow Spot 12-year-old, which is a pot still, and then I've got this one here with the nice horses on it. That's a single malt from Ireland. So I'm trying
which O'Connell is that?
What? Oh,
which O'Connell is it?
It's just the regular one. It's nothing fancy.
No finish. Okay, that's good. Good.
It's smooth.
Smooth. Perfect.
You're not allowed to use that word anymore, Dave.
Ouch. No, we are. We can all laugh about it. It's perfect. Drew and Sheila. Sheila Drew, I should say.
I'm Sheila. I am on Twitter and Instagram and all of the other things as Anconi. And I am double fisting the Redbreast 12, just the standard 40% edition, and the Green Spot Montelena edition.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. Drew?
Drew Semper. Got the same two in my glass, but also just for comparison of mouthfeel, I have a Knob Creek Rye small batch and a Woodford Reserve single barrel, just as some comparison.
All right. We were going to
Scientific.
Scientific. Not really. But we're good. Jason, you're up.
Hi, my name's Jason. You can find me on Instagram as jmac25. I got the same whiskey that I had earlier, the Whistler 7-year-old Irish whiskey, which I thought was single pot distilled, but apparently I was lied to. It's not. But I will drink it. I'm not going to throw it down the sink. And it is tasty. Yeah, but I'm going to have to run out and get a proper single pot whiskey after this, I believe.
Well,
who sold that to you?
You can come to Sheila, Drew, me, and Nick's house. Actually, I shouldn't say them. You can come to my place when you're picking up your samples, and we'll set you up. We've got enough to go around. Nick, what you got?
I'm still working on the Kilbeggan single pot still, and I went and pulled out my JJ Corey to throw it against.
And that one's a blend.
Yes, it is. It is their malt and grain blend.
And you gave me some of that, actually. You came over and gave it to me. Yeah. And that was lovely. It was lovely. And not just smooth. There's more to it. Fionnan.
Yes. So just for comparison, I'm still drinking Redbreast Can Strength, but I'm drinking batch 2 2019. See how. So this is actually, you can still pick it up because it's not that long ago. But this was a particularly, I remember I've had it as a set a few times with various friends and societies, and this is definitely a fan favorite. The second batch of 2019, and usually goes for the same price as the current one, and just because it's not that far back. But if you can find it, great.
Grab it. Got it. And I'm Dolph. I'm in charge. I'm trying to corral these cats, and that's my job. So what am I drinking? I'm drinking Redbreast and Green Spot, and we're going to get to these, trying to tell the difference between what is more oily and which one is more creamy. Creamy, apparently. Oily, apparently. But we're going to see if I can distinguish it without looking at the at the labels myself. So Fionnan exemplifies the After Dram adeptly with this following quote. I like it a lot. So honestly, though, if there's a better way to spend an evening than with close company, comic banter, and serious tippling, I've yet to discover it. And I agree completely, and that's what we're attempting to do here. And we're going to do this. Let's start with kind of a, I don't know if we want to call it tongue-in-cheek quote, but we'll throw another quote out there. Whiskey snobbery is like fungus. It feeds on bullshit and it prospers in the dark. So, Fionnan, panel, where is your line between whiskey geek, which we all think we are, and whiskey snob, which I might very well be, but I'd like to know where the line is for you guys. What do we think? And we'll finish up with Fionnan. You'll tell us what you think the difference is between it after you've heard all of us.
The correct answer. Once you've all put forward the suggestions. What do you
I've got a feeling that the whiskey snob wouldn't listen to this kind of stuff because they already know everything.
Okay.
And the group that I'm sitting in front of, we want more information.
Yes.
We just take all that information in and I can just see it rattling around in our heads trying to figure everything out. Well, this happens, that happens, this, that. And yeah, I want more.
Okay. That's a good definition. I like it. Yeah. We are all definitely geeks. How about something else? Someone else?
To me, the snobbery. Go, Mac.
No, okay. Sorry. I was just gonna say, for me, simply put, the whiskey snob is the one who won't drink a particular whiskey because they think it's beneath them.
Okay.
You know, if we look to the last quote, you know, spending the time with friends and having a dram that we enjoy. Obviously, the whiskey is a part of that, but it shouldn't get in the way of, you know, the friendship first and foremost. If it does, then that person, to me, is the whiskey snob.
Get rid of it. All right. Good stuff. And Sheila or Drew, looks like one of you want to say it.
Oh, I have lots of thoughts on the whiskey snob thing. Mac hits it bang on the like not drinking things that are beneath them.
Okay.
But there's that whole idea of I don't think they're very adventurous in their drinking because they've got very preset notions on what it is to drink whiskey. So they've got that concept of age statement versus not drinking the non-age statements. There's those deluded souls who won't drink certain whiskeys because it's not a certain age. So I have to drink, you know, a 21-year-old or the older is better. Which we all know is not necessarily true. There's a lot of aged whiskeys out there that are just absolutely crap because they sat in horrible barrels for far too long. Yep. Or people who won't drink certain countries' whiskeys because they think certain countries don't produce good whiskey. Or they have this horrible idea that the whiskey that's actually produced in that country comes from that country as opposed to, say, coming from Canada. Lots of, you know, not necessarily true.
Oh, shots fired.
Or these ideas that blends aren't good whiskey. So that is my idea of a whiskey snob, as opposed to a whiskey geek.
Okay.
I have lots of ideas about whiskey.
I'll throw out a scenario and you'll tell me. Black bottle. I absolutely despise it. And there's people that just love it and they've talked about it. And I won't drink it now when it's offered to me. So am I a whiskey snob? Because I just won't drink black bottle. And I love Islay whiskeys. I love Islay malt. And I've tried black bottle from, I think it was the 70s and really, really liked it. But someone gives me that black bottle now, I won't drink it.
But you drank it once.
Yeah.
But you tried it. Just because you don't like the new iteration of it doesn't mean, like, you don't have to like everything you tried, but you tried it.
I won't even drink it now. You give it to me, I'm not drinking it. I'm sorry. Sorry, Sheila, I like you a lot, but take this back. I don't want it in front of me. Am I a snob?
But
you tried it.
Okay. So that's it. Are you willing to try it is your line?
And if they change the formulation in 5 or 10 years and I tell you they changed the formula,
I'll probably try it again.
Yeah.
Okay. Fionnan.
Yeah, I mean, mostly just comes down to being a dick. You know, you can know nothing and know everything and not be a snob all along the spectrum. And you can be a snob all along the spectrum from knowing nothing to knowing everything. You know, it's a personality feature. But I think, it comes down to like what whiskey means to people. And there's an awful lot of people, and whiskey has for a long time aggressively marketed itself to court this attitude, and it's now retreating back from it. But you know, it's a creature of its own devising. But they're like, you know, the guy who drinks it because, you know, what's his name, Daniel Craig, James Bond, orders one in what's that horrible scene where he shoots the thing and says a waste of scotch, all this kind of like just drippy, douchey kind of stuff. And again, like nothing to do with whiskey. It's to do with status. It's to do with prestige. And it can manifest itself in different ways where people see it as an extension of something. They know the correct answer that they're supposed to give. And that can be a blunt answer, like, I know I'm supposed to like Johnny Walker Blue, versus like a very in-depth answer, say, like, I know I'm supposed to like 1970s Ardbeg. You know, you can know a whole very little and still be kind of a jerk. And you can know a whole lot genuinely and still have reflections of similar kind of attitudes. And I think it's really about how you ultimately like, and then you get, and I mean, I think like any hobby, whiskey draws a certain kind of almost like OCD anoractum around it, and that's not quite the same thing. And I think sometimes the industry turns its back on those people, turns its back on the geeks. In recent years, you often hear whiskey needs to change, especially you hear this in Scotch. You know, like, and they're always almost like shying away from the people who are most in love with the category and saying, oh, we need to make it more accessible, more this, more that. But when you hear them talking about, they're not talking about accessibility in terms of like convivial, you know, experience. They're just talking about reaching a wider market share, you know, and it's not quite the same thing either. And I think you shouldn't be embarrassed about being into details, about being into 1970s Ardbeg as opposed to contemporary Ardbeg, as opposed to whatever, you know, comparing them. That's not in and of itself bad in any way. It's a joy, you know, but as long as it's inviting and as long as people like it for itself. And similarly, like when you talk about like refusing something, okay, like I can't stand the taste of cumin at all. I almost have like a weird reaction to it. And so like, yeah, usually if I'm given like bad food by someone, if someone has made dinner and it's not very good, you know, plow my way through it and, you know, just grin and bear and, oh, this is great. Oh, wow, thanks for having me over. But, you know, there'd be a few things where I would almost struggle, but they're based on like something to do with taste, something to do with a genuine experience, and not to do with some preconception I've inherited and brought into the room with me before any of this happened, you know. And those preconceptions, they go along with, again, back to that kind of correct answer response, this kind of call and echo about what it means. And I think that idea just saps the joy out of everything. But similarly, you know, geekdom itself is loads of fun, and it's a pleasure to meet someone who's really into something and says, oh, you need to try, you know, such and such, you know, find out why, you know, look, when Glendronach switched from being direct flame to copper coiling, you know, you can change the flavor drops off, blah blah blah, and that's fascinating. And to hear someone say that, and to drink to those spread, you know, that's not snobbishness, that's obsession. But the way that obsession can be conveyed can be snobby. But then similarly, the way you can convey piss all information, such as just knowing that you're supposed to order Johnny Walker Blue, can be conveyed with equal snobbery. So it's almost like they're not actually as related as they're sometimes portrayed, you know.
So let's put a Venn diagram with the geek, the snob, and the dick at the top, and all three of them intertwining. And if you're all three, heaven help you.
Point of intersection, you know, and then I'm pretty sure you get, yeah. I won't name names, but you know, the David Beckham, you know, maybe he's nice.
Somewhere in the middle. Right there in the middle.
Well, I refuse to buy anything that's endorsed by a celebrity, whether it's paint or shoes or whiskey or gin or anything like that. I just won't do it.
Long Branch, which is I find that to be a half decent bourbon. So you might want to try that one. The only one I can think of. And someone tell me the name of the guy. My wife likes him. Long Branch. There we go. McConaughey. Ooh. She does like him. So maybe a try. You don't have to buy the bottle. I've got the thing, so I'll give you a second.
I like him, and I'm not buying that to drink in my Cadillac when I'm driving down the road. Yeah,
right.
Because he pushes Cadillac
with the sound of the ice cubes in it. Perfect. Done.
Yeah.
We're going to be a little bit geeky, anyways, because we talked about geeky. And Fionnan, thank you for making us feel good about what we are. We're good. Taste shouldn't be predictable from the aroma. So this jumped at me. So taste shouldn't be predictable from the aroma. It should come as a shock. The finish shouldn't repeat the taste. It should quirk it. So internally, these three stages should have more than one feature. So panel, do you agree with this? And did any of these three statements surprise you? And I'm going to say it surprised me a little bit, but I'd like the discussion with that. And I'm going to say it again. Taste shouldn't be predictable from the aroma. It should come as a shock. The finish shouldn't repeat the taste. It should quicken. So we're talking about the aroma, so the nose, the palate, and the finish. And I'll leave it at that. I don't want to talk too much. What do you guys think about that?
So I'm going to jump in on this one right away because
do it.
I like it when I smell something different than I taste, but I also like it when I smell something and then I taste it, and then it becomes it becomes a drink. Would I buy this drink or wouldn't I buy this drink? What it comes down to for me, and getting both sides of that coin, I'm kind of happy with both sides of that coin. If it's different nose and different taste, I'm good. If it's the same nose, same taste, I'm good also. So
how about the finish? Should not repeat the taste. It shouldn't just be the same thing and trailing off, I think. Just
well,
dead.
now I'm looking for things at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the drink. So
yeah.
That's a tough. That was the toughest one of the three that you mentioned here for me.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And I like them all being different, but in the nose, you should be able to pick up more than one thing, same as on the palate, same as in the finish. So if there's one of the 15 things that travel between, that's all fine. But to have one scent in the nose, then one taste, and one fit, that's a pretty boring.
Well, it would be like drinking the sherry itself.
Again, to be honest, that was the spirit in which it was written, was that it shouldn't, it's not, the taste should not have anything that was in the nose. It shouldn't be repeated. But, Redbreast smells like ginger, it tastes like ginger, and it finishes like ginger. It's still not the same nose, taste, finish,
Yeah.
All being the same wouldn't be great, but I don't mind tasting, like you said, ginger in a couple, presented a couple different ways.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think you said it perfectly there, Drew. You want the elements going, kind of lines masking, not just one, but there's probably several that you can bring from one to the other and then to the end. Sorry, Nick, before I start yammering away, you have something to add, Nick and Jason? I have to stop myself sometime.
I'll let Nick go first.
Nick?
The nose to the palate to the finish, there's an interplay. There's flavors that overlap. There's tones that carry across. There's an interplay that you pick up on that palate finish, that you come back to that nose on that second sip, and you're like, oh, hey, I'm catching that on that second go round. It's like, now I'm catching you. And it's like, oh, and it's that little mystery there. You're like, oh, let me dive deeper. And you're sort of entranced into that mystery, and it pulls you deeper into that dram, and you're going, oh, and that's that beauty and that mystery of what you're drinking in. Sort of that. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Well, I'm just going to say this is exactly. I'm looking for an adventure. I want to hear a story, or who talked about painting a picture. There's this isn't smooth. Okay, it comes in, goes out, it's done. I didn't get anything out of it, but it was smooth. I got no better description. Painting a picture is just so much fun, and I've been playing around with a bottle here. I got on Thursday that just has been so different so many times that it's fun. I don't really care for it, but it's really fun
to try and nail it down. And Fionnan gave us I put it up there, the stained glass analogy. I like that, with one on top of the other, on top of the other. And that, Nick, you made me think of that when you talked about the line coming through. And go ahead, Fionnan. What do you think of this? And
again,
the predictable thing surprised me.
It's been a while since I've read any of these paragraphs. I was young. I probably said a lot of stuff was BS in itself. So don't take any of this stuff too seriously. And I should have said that at the start. I've heard myself talk more than anyone, and I wouldn't even trust half of it. What I think I was thinking, because there are whiskeys that are like heavy hammers. They smell, like a lot of whiskey smells like vanilla, tastes like vanilla, and finishes like vanilla, but it's really pleasurable. Or even like especially there are like rye, especially I think a lot of rye whiskeys that I love that you taste something on the nose and you almost go diving into the whiskey looking for it. I'm gonna catch that thing, and that's a lot of fun. But I suppose the idea, like Redbreast would be an example. So like this is Redbreast cask strength, a pretty good one as well. And yeah, it does smell like ginger, taste like ginger, and finish like ginger, but it manages not to be repetitive. The palate is not just a repetition of the nose. Again, there are continuous threads, but for instance, when you smell, I mean, for me, a lot of the paradox of Irish pot still in premise is that it smells so sharp and so crackly. And then from that, that grassiness, that leafiness, that gingeriness, all that stuff, you don't expect oil unless you know it's coming, which most people, if they've had more than one, do know it's coming. But in premise, it feels so strange it should be so heavy. And that itself is kind of a joy. And it comes as a complication. And then with the high alcohol ones, again, like, most high proof whiskey, when you swallow, you get this weird, like, tactile sensation from just alcohol grip, and that in the oil feels different. And so, they shouldn't be just shots left, right, and behind you, but similarly, you want to see some sort of progression, and I suppose it would be the difference between what can be great whiskey and what can be amazing whiskey, because again, there are whiskeys that are, simple enough and brilliant enough. Usually, like high proof whiskey that's simple can still be really grippy or fun, But anything else, like Powers blend, smells like shoe polish, tastes like shoe polish. It's lovely, Usually, what like the kind of whiskey I tend to drink with people who don't drink whiskey, and it's not complicated, but it's not, it's not just smooth. It is a very particular thing, and it's robust, and it's a blend, and but it's predictable in a sense, but it's almost predictable in the sense of like an anvil falling, and it's there's a certain musicality to the heft, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, I'll have you finish off with this one though. The finish shouldn't repeat the taste; it should cork it. What do you mean by it should cork it?
Well, that's what I was getting at with like not repeating, but again, estranging or changing, playing with. That it's not that things shouldn't repeat or things shouldn't be the same, but that they should be corked. It's like, wow, well, that's what I was looking for, but it's a bit different now, or it's gone, and it's changed a bit. That's the nose I got coming through on the finish. But it's so. For instance, again, like Redbreast, a very good example. You get that weird, the nose of all Redbreast, but especially the cask strength ones. You have that, figgy kind of medjool date, heavy autumnal kind of weighty fruit, and ginger crackle, and those two things, which themselves kind of a paradox. That we often say Christmas. Do people in Canada eat Christmas pudding? Because it's unknown in the US.
Yes,
but okay, civilized country. I thought of assumptions. But there is that kind of Christmas pudding. It's fruity, but it's weighty, and I think that's a big part of Redbreast's identity, and Irish Potsdam and sherry, whatever brand. That idea that it's fruity, but the fruits are all kind of like brown sugary and left out in the sun for a bit, and that kind of stuff. And it's the mix of that and that, like ginger or gingerbread or etc. So on the nose, you get a kind of a sharp ginger, almost like ginger ale sometimes. And then again, that much more pervasive, again, like medjool date thing. And then when you get to the finish of the cask strength, is that ginger has suddenly been given, like, again, high alcohol, it's a mouth drying sensation. So you get ginger redelivered to this like wonderful mouth drying sensation that itself is kind of a bizarre finish to the oils that were in your mouth when you were drinking. So it's fun. It makes a lot of sense. and yet it changes, and so that would be an example for me of what I mean by corking it, that it's surprising at the same time that it's entrancing, or at the same time that it's complete, that it's got musical unit, if you want to use these kinds of words, but with riffs.
Okay, and I agree with the ginger and the drying. I was going to ask some people this. Well, I will in a second. It's just, where do you get the drying feeling? For me, it's at the very back of the throat and on the side and the back. And I'm wondering if, okay, so you're going, I was wondering if other people were the same. What I want to do now is, this was what I was waiting for. This was my moment to tell the difference between the oily and the creamy. But I'm going to throw a quote out there because I love my quotes. In Irish pot still, texture is king, and smoothness is actually a fairly boring promise. I really like that. So that's a quote. And great quote, perfect for our focus on the mouthfeel. And Fionnan, is there another spirit that used as many descriptors for texture as Irish pot still whiskey? Because you talk about it more than anyone else. So we've had 11 books. Of the 11 books we've had and the folk that they focused on, yours is the one that's talked about the mouthfeel the most. And not just that, within the book, you have your flavor wheel, which everyone else has their own flavor wheel as well. But you also have a texture description, which I haven't seen for anyone else. So is there another whiskey that does this and I just haven't picked up on it? Or do you think it's all Irish pot still that talks about the different elements of the mouthfeel?
I mean, I think because Irish pot still is so, the difference between it and malt whiskey is so heavily tagged to raw barley and raw barley's oily viscosity, and that heft. It's just so, like, when people talk about single malts, like, yeah, you do get people talking about Clynelish being waxy, or people do obsess over certain kinds of texture, but it's so much louder and so much more visceral when you're comparing. Well, first of all, when you compare malt whiskey any kind to pot still is a heavier drink. They all, and even when we start talking about the difference between oily or creamy or glossy or anything, it all is still fundamentally much oilier. It is much more viscous, and so obviously it lures itself. People have nothing to say about it, and they'll say, there's some pot still oiliness in this. It's almost an automatic response because it's so striking. It's so much in your face, and I think people pay attention to the variations internally because their striking existence is so much a part of the style itself that once you're stressing oil, then you start getting worried about, like, is this more linseed oily than more creamy, more
crude oil?
Yeah, exactly. You get all these pleasant. There's this wonderfully unpleasant terms thrown about in pot still, a lot of which are in that book. But yeah, you hear, like, diesel versus, and it's really eerie because how people hit on these terms, like, there's a real diesel-y smell as opposed to a linseed oil. Are you really sucking diesel? Like, that was just a phrase. You weren't actually supposed to do that, but
I gotta try it.
Yeah.
All right. So your single pot still texture spectrum, we have that, and I loved it right there. So it's that one. The flavor wheel itself, I know I referred to it, and I could have probably looked online and gotten that one. So it's a nice looking wheel. And it's descriptive, but again, I was stuck with the spectrum. I was stuck with the texture spectrum, and I've always wanted to differentiate between oily and creamy, and I've used them interchangeably, and I've been corrected by one person in particular for JP Weiser's Dr. Don. Whenever I say it, he'll inevitably correct me. Dolph, it's not oily, it's creamy. No, that one's not creamy, it's oily. He does that, and that's okay because he knows what he's talking about. And I tend to believe him, not always, but I tend to. So this was my experiment. So I'd like everybody, if you've got the two or just one, can you tell the difference between the yellow-green spot, because you've got the yellow spot, and so if you have the yellow spot or green spot, look for the oiliness and what oily feels like. And if you have the red breast, you're looking for the creaminess. And I want you to tell me if you can tell the difference. And I've been going back and forth, and I think I can now. I don't know if I could describe it in words.
You picked a harder one by picking the Montelena, because there you've got a finish. So it's again, it kind of blurs the it's one more element you have to kind of.
I've got a yellow spot as well. Would the yellow spot be better to do this with?
No, well, you probably the same problem again, because there you're dealing with an Malaga finish
Another
as well.
finish.
Yeah, no, you're gonna finish.
Okay.
I think.
And I'm going to leave it to you to try to put it into words, panel and Fionnan, if you can. I can only do this by taste and try to memorize the feeling. But if one of you could actually explain it in words, I'd be very interested to hear the difference between them.
Yeah, I can use the word oily, but boy, try to describe it to somebody it's really hard to do.
And feeling the difference is harder. And I've gotten so far as to actually have a teaspoon of oil in my mouth and cream, coffee cream, so 10%, or maybe it might be 18% cream, trying to tell the difference. But it coats it and it's smooth. So, but I have to get beyond the smooth, right? But I have been using both those other descriptors for probably about 5 years interchangeably, and I need to figure this out. So by the end of this, our 3 weeks, Fionnan, I really hope to get to the point because I'm opening a different bottle every week. Hopefully, by the end, I could tell. And if I can't, it's been an experiment, and it's been an expensive experiment. But hopefully, I can. Sheila Drew, can you tell the difference?
Well, I don't know for you, but immediately for me, the redbreast feels thicker in my mouth. So it feels like it expands, takes up more space.
It's less when I try to swash it around, it's harder to move over the tongue. So that's what thicker is to me. And I agree with that statement. But oily, this one, it does coat it, but less viscous. I don't want to say that.
It's runnier.
Yeah.
It's slicker.
I could do that.
Slippery.
Okay.
If that helps.
No.
Like there's a definite difference in mouthfeel between the two.
There is. And I think I just have to keep going back and forth and doing it. But I would have just said redbreast is more creamy than green spot. It would have been my description to somebody before I started reading the book, before I tried to tell the difference. And I would have just said, or one's more oily than the other, or a thicker oil. Fionnan, help us out.
It was almost better.
Yeah, and again, it's complicated by the fact that people just say oil for a single pot still in general when comparing it to all other forms of whiskey. So, you're in a league where everything's already inherently a bit oily. For me, okay, let me get normal, because it's harder with redbreast cask strength because, of course, you've got alcohol there as well, which is kind of mouth drying and a whole different texture.
Okay.
And fun to try that creaminess against the cask strength delivery. But let me just pour some normal redbreast. And it's funny because if you look, obviously these are both made by the same distillery. And that's one thing that has radically changed since that book was written, which is when that was written, modern pot still came out of Middleton. And now there's distilleries all over Ireland, and a lot of those pot stills have just come out, or they're coming of age, or that's changing quite rapidly. But within Middleton, obviously, Middleton make various styles of distillate based on cut points and based on essentially they've lightened the faints, they distilled the faints and fed them back into the system. So when you get down to the nitty gritty, there's light pot, mod pot, and heavy pot. There used to be something called trad pot. And now they kind of seem to have blurred heavy and trad together, but they used to distinguish. But theoretically, green spot is just mod pot, and redbreast is a mix of the medium cut, as it were, and redbreast is a mix of medium and light, but with more sherry in the mix as well, which kind of complicates things. So they are, card tricks of a kind. But it's funny because, as you say, when you think, well, okay, shouldn't it get creamier with the big cuts? But it's almost like when you get heavy pot on its own, it starts to taste, kind of chewy. It's almost like waxy. So it's a different thing altogether. And waxy, again, you hear terms, people like Clynelish throw around words like waxy, but when you get Irish pot still waxy, it literally feels like you've melted a candle. It's you're in a much heavier league in general. And now we've got double distilled pot still coming on stream, and again that tends to be very, very waxy. But back to Redbreast. So Redbreast is about 3/4 bourbon barrel, 1/4 sherry for classic Redbreast 12. So obviously try and ignore the sherry as much as possible. You know, the bourbon is, you know, the taste elements will always kind of beguile you into thinking one thing or another. But for me, first of all pot still whiskey, and the first thing I ever tell anyone about Irish pot still is don't treat it like malt. You know, I think that's in the book quite heavily is take a slightly larger mouthful with any of them. You know, give it plenty of time, give it, you know, time to develop. But because so much of it is about texture, make sure you have enough in there to kind of get a sense of that. You know, you put in enough to feel that. Give it, again, don't gulp it, but have, you know, chew it. Have enough in there, and the more, you know, again, I'm not saying like knock it back or even, you know, take it in swigs, but when you have a bit more in your mouth, that difference in texture is much easier to appreciate. But
that's a good point, because the more that's in the mouth, the more, well, the Redbreast is more, it is heavier. The cream is harder to move around the palate than the oil.
And as you said, I think someone said buttery before. There is this weird, the sensation is almost like that difference between whole fat milk and, you know, grim milk, you know, the various levels of non-milk in between, you know, that thing that you can kind of crave in proper dairy. And that's what I get in Redbreast, is that weird, like, lipidity, if that's a word, you know, that strange sensation, you know, almost like the rim of the liquid is a bit fatty or a bit more buttery. Green spot, we've got the normal green spot here, but green spot, obviously smell can be beguiling, but green spot smells a lot like linseed oil, less so than it used to. Now it's really sweetened in recent years. It used to smell like kind of cut grass, linseed oil, and green apples, and now it's more like green apples and vanilla. And it's really honed in on the kind of Granny Smith type taste. But it still has a bit of that linseed, especially in comparison to Redbreast. But linseed oil, I mean, even just cooking oils in general, not, you know, rapeseed oil, all this stuff, they're great for working out what texture is, you know. But here, for me, in the mouth, it comes down to actual oils. That weird feeling of the difference between cooking oils and water. You know, it's not that, again, lipidity. It's not that rim kind of creamy fattiness. It's, again, slightly thicker, slightly chewier, and still texturally bound. And again, they're both thick, again, in comparison to malt. But this one in particular, there is that weird, like, heaviness rather than creaminess. Might even be a better way of thinking about it than oiliness versus, you know, when we talk about oil, it does, again, it's distorted by the fact that it smells like linseed oil as well. But I don't know, I used to have, my roommate in school was the captain of the hurling team.
Okay.
So you may or may not be familiar. Hurling, it's an Irish sport. Bit like, I think the best description I heard in America was a cross between field hockey and murder. It's
rough.
Yeah, and it's like hockey, but the ball stays in the air. And it's very quick and it's, anyway. There's a Scottish version called shinty. They're quite related historically. Shinty's a bit low to the ground, but once in a while they play kind of compromised rules with each other. But anyway, the hurl itself, the come on, you tend to rub them with linseed oil to keep them in good shape. And I remember just the apartment would like reek of linseed oil. It was really unpleasant, actually. And I'd come in from class and he'd be there on the sofa just rubbing these things into them. And I've never forgotten that smell. And you can be lured by these concepts. When I smell green spot, I immediately think of that smell, that weird like wood linseed oil. And when I taste it, like there is that oil, and think, oh geez, am I being lured down this alley by the nose? You know, it's so hard when you talk about texture to divorce it from taste and smell because they're always there. But yeah, if I'm to get rid of like oiliness as a principle, it really is about, it's almost about chewiness. It's about like edibility, you know. And like when you get the Powers whiskies, the pot still Powers, there is like a chewiness and a physicality. And when you get the old pot stills, like stuff from the 60s, it's, yeah, you start using terms like waxy, where it feels like there's something slightly, it's almost like American Jello, you know, like something dissolving into liquid in your mouth. It's a weird, you know, sensation like that. So there's, again, I wouldn't even worry too much about the difference between oiliness and creaminess when it comes down to it. I'd worry about equipping yourself to think about texture in the same way you think about taste, and try and find reference points that help you get to grips with the texture of a whiskey and then how it relates to the taste, you know. And I think that's much more liberating than being told there's a creaminess flavor and there's an oiliness. But like all descriptions, you know, they're really frail armaments we've devised to try and like shoot at the targets of what the drink actually does, and each dram is so different, so idiosyncratic, that, you know, it's really about, one of the joys of Irish pot still is thinking about texture in that broad sense, in that range of possibilities, not just a straight dichotomy, and not even just in terms of how heavy or how light it is, and then strapping that onto texture. I mean, Redbreast texture is such a big part of its identity that, you know, you get Bayside sherried whiskies, heavily sherried, you know, like Glendronach and whatnot, that rely on a similar methodology, well, not only mythology, but same evocation as Redbreast. But what distorts that with Irish pot still that's been in sherry heavily is that oil, you know, is that cream, is that textural heft, and it makes the sherry feel, even though you hear dates tossed about in these tastes, but when you have it here, like heavy medjool, like brown sugar, you know, it's much more to that than these kind of, you know, actual fruits. I'm
going to get information from that with you as well, because in your book, or in the Redbreast section, you were saying how Redbreast, the sherry is different from a single malt sherry. And I need to find a single malt sherry that you're thinking about, where, because there's so many sherry whiskeys, so many sherry everything that we have in Ireland, in Scotland. I'm going to have you suggest one for me to try to see the difference between the heavier, more. Sorry, I have a quote that you had in here. Like I always have quotes about the difference between that type of sherry and theirs. It's a heavier, darker, and there's one descriptive word. I'll find it later. Doesn't matter, but I will get that from you. But I want you to answer this first. You said it would be lovely to taste what a halt at the second still might do for a single pot style whiskey, and you've just mentioned that there are some coming out. So, what would you tell me? What could you say is the difference between a regular triple distilled single pot still whiskey and a double distilled, flavor wise? So, I'm sorry, no, let's do both. You said one's waxier as opposed to creamier or oily, but let's go for flavor.
Yeah, so of course it varies by distillery in the same way, malt texture, and even again, like Middleton are triple distilling in different senses. You know, the cut points are changing, and you know, things lightening. But even, okay, there's a distillery up north that have been making a lot of noise called Ecklinville. And Ecklinville, they're a bit like the Irish Daft Mill in that they've been around for quite some time and they haven't put a product out, and they've kind of got this like incredibly disciplined, you know, trigger finger in the way that Daft Mill did for years, where everyone was waiting for the first one to come out. So Ecklinville is like 8 years old at this point, and there still hasn't been an Ecklinville. They and actually they were in existence when I wrote A Glass Apart, but they were just camera shy. And I know them very well, and they were saying we're not ready to be in the public eye. You know, they had that kind of reticence about it. Now they are in the public eye now all the time. They have a bonded single malt called Dunvilles, and the Dunville single cask fly like hotcakes. They're the closest Irish thing to, you know, they're like single casks. You know, they have these Palo Cortado casks and PX sherry casks and this and that, and that's all. They've gotten a lot of attention for that. Now that's all coolly distillate that they've been just drenching in various types of sherry and putting out at high strengths in well-selected single casks and this and that. And they'll probably keep doing that after their own stuff comes out. But within the like secret bosom of Dunvilles that people are always itching to get a taste with, they're actually extremely creative. So they've been doing triple distilled malt, double distilled malt, triple distilled pot still, and double distilled pot still. And not just that, they've been playing around with the mash bills of the pot still internally. But even just taking the malt and raw barley classic pot stills, if you compare the triple distilled one to the double distilled one, the double distilled one taste wise is much more chalky. It's much more. It's very pot still, and there's a number of people who are doing double distilled pot still now. And you know, pot still is not sweet. Malt, you know, it stands to reason. Malt makes sugars. You know, well, of course, must get converted into alcohol, but the sweeter flavors you get with triple distilled pot still is already more linseed oil, more hefty, more a little bit left in the sun, more again like weighty and not as fruity, not as overtly estery as malt. And when you see the double distilled stuff, it starts to actually taste granular. It starts to taste a bit like barnyard stuff, like you've spent around too much time around horses. You know, that weird like like out of the barn smell. And the texture now, it still has that linseed oil as well. And then the texture, you know, is again, it can be like chewy. It's waxy. It's heavy. With some of them, you know, and then when you branch out into adjuncts, you know, so like Ecklenville have been playing around with oats. So they're down the road from Cumber, who are reviewed in that book, one of the old lost distilleries. Cumber used to use about 12% oats in the mash bill. And so they did it, and Cumber was double distilled pot still. So that would have been, so there was double distilled pot still once, you know, they closed in the 50s. So it was there for reference way back, but, you know, in modern equipment as new make, you know, who knows? So that was interesting, was to compare double distilled pot still versus triple distilled pot still, and then double distilled pot still without oats and double distilled pot still with oats. And you start to get, so there's so much coming out of the box at the moment, and again, a lot of this stuff is new make. So you know, there's another distillery, Redimon, up north as well, who have a wonderful double distilled pot still that's probably coming out in the next few years. So a lot of this stuff is just at the cost, you know, and it's at the breaking point. So we'll start seeing all of this. You know, thankfully Middleton, because they have this complex in-house regime. Or, you know, not regime. Well, they have a regime as well as Pernod Ricard, but the regimen, there was already textural variety because of the different styles of distillate. But now that we're seeing all these people, in just different styles, different still shapes, all the theoretical things that change single malt, different cut points, etc. But then we're also getting double and triple distilled distillations and whatnot, and people mucking about with them. I mean, even, you know, you get some people doing, you know, Alice Springbank, where they're double distilling, triple distilling, and mixing back together, or they're mixing double distilled with one that's had the faints redistilled. You know, there's any number of things you can do. So most of the stuff, that's why I never wanted to update a glass apart, because it would be you know, out of date almost at birth, and B, it's at exactly the wrong moment where I'd just be chasing a lot of new Middleton releases, you know, because everyone else's stuff hasn't yet come out yet. Yeah. So, you know, it was just easier to put it to bed. But I think that time, 2015, when that came out, you know, looked very, very different to now. But now is only you know, we're starting to see first glimpses of the future. You know,
well, and you should be really happy about that too, because you alluded to it. I hope they do this. I hope they do this. And I was thinking you were fairly prophetic, because everything that you were hoping they were going to do, going to the spots again, talking about the blue spot and the red spot coming out, you were hoping that they'd come back. They're out now. So, but the double distilled, the triple, I would love to have it from the same distillery, but having no other difference, having the same mash bill, stopping at 2 and then do the third. I would love to try that. With the oats, I would like that as well. I've made a beer. So I made a beer. So the same mash bill for a beer that I make, a Doffelbock or a Doppelbock. I call it Doffelbock. one with oats and one without oats. And I love the one with oats because it adds to the mouthfeel. And it doesn't change the flavor. It's just a mouthfeel thing that I have. So I like that. And going back to the Redbreast description I finally found it. You were saying that Redbreast compared to its sherried scotches was darkened and estranged. Those were the two words you used for that. And I like that a lot. Darkened and estranged.
Turn the light. It's been darkened and estranged.
You're estranged at the moment. There you go. We're back. And I need you to run me through something, Fionnan, when you come back.
Yeah.
You are going to tell me, because I did this and I don't want to do this again next week. I've heard too many people talk about a whiskey being balanced. I hate that. I hate going to a tasting and I hear some douchebags. This is so balanced. And I'm thinking, you're full of shit. I taste one note and it's the same freaking note and that's it. It's not balanced whatsoever. You're full of crap. So when you talked about balanced and you introduced the notion, I would like you to tell me with your tea bag test, please. So I've got my empty. I've got my tea with sugar. No, my tea with sugar and the tea with lemon. I need you to tell me what to do to get to a balanced note. And maybe one of those douchebags that keeps saying that this is balanced will know what they're talking about in the future. So tell me how to make this balanced.
You're presuming that I know what I'm talking about. You know,
I do. We are all assuming you do.
And here's me thinking, oh God, what did I write at the time?
Until someone proves you wrong, you are the authority on balanced whiskey and
I think,
tea.
You know, I picked that one up from a friend of mine when I was living in California. I knew a guy who was a wine chemist, and that was definitely his suggestion. We would kind of get together for dramming sessions, and he was obsessed with balance, which of course, you know, like the big part of the wine world. But yeah, again, he was saying that like when you try two sharply different tastes, it's easy to work out balance. Well, I would say like balance should be self-inherent. You know, like I'll put it this way, like it was an easy way to explain. Like, yeah, you have something very dry and something very sweet, and then you mix them, and you kind of get what they're doing to each other. And at the same time, like most of the time, that kind of balance, like it's really just complication, and it's self-evident. You go like, well, what the hell is going on? Wow, this is one thing, but it's at the same time it's this other thing, and wow, this is you know, balance is obvious. You know, if you're going looking for it, then again, as you say, you lend yourself to the people who are like creating, you know, edifices of their own devising about, you know, what balance should be. But in terms of that sense, that primal sense of like, it's almost like saying what it really is a test for is how to understand complexity of two different flavors that are inherently different, and when they come together and they're at this weird, like, you know, sniper range where they just flicker off in both directions quite well, you know, where it's dry enough and it's like, okay, like, you know, again, like not to revert everything back to this Redbreast cask strength, but it's what I'm drinking, and there is like, okay, oil is mouth lubricating, you know, it's hefty. Irish pot still is oily by default. High strength delivery, you know, ethanol itself is a mouth drying sensation. So when you get a good cask, what I love about cask strength pot still, and especially when you get a good batch, is that contradiction in terms. You're like, this is oiling up my mouth and it's drying it at the same time, and this shouldn't be occurring, you know. And that's not even a taste thing. But I would call it, what was called balance in that book is probably closer to that concept, where you get two things, the kind of like odd couple effect, you know, and when it happens, you don't need it explained. You don't need to go looking for it. You don't need someone to tell you it's there. It usually just registers as being really bewildering, you know, as being a kind of, you know, and then you kind of sit down and try and come up with some ridiculous tea experiment to try to explain to yourself why you're feeling this.
It's ridiculous, but I did it, and you're going to lead me through it, Fionnan. So I have sickeningly sweet tea because I don't drink sugar. I don't like sweet whiskeys. I don't like sweet anything. So it's very, very sweet. And in here, I have tea with lemon. And what should I do to try to make this balanced, please? Tell us what to do.
You should put both of them down the sink and come back to the whiskey. You're gonna
Oh my God!
I was gonna say the same thing,
I'm
Fionnan.
done.
It's in the
tried.
comfort,
I
you
tried.
know,
I'm done.
your own room afterwards.
All right.
We
No,
can
we're
have this
done.
conversation
Forget
via
it.
text.
I'm done.
God.
No, and I'm going to the next question too. I've been cut off. I'm doing something else. And I'm starting with a quote. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. I am. So we've had authors tell us, and Nick especially, she got thrown under the bus for this, who told us not to eat strong flavors when drinking whiskey because it will dull the whiskey drinking experience. So, and the example is a good friend of ours, David Nikoljimu, told Nick, do not have chocolate while you're having your whiskey. I don't care what you're doing. Don't do it. Don't cleanse your palate. Don't do it. You're wrong, Nick. And eat it because the oil coats the tongue and we can't taste it, apparently. Do we agree, though? And here's two things. With this, if the goal is to experience whiskey purely. So that's question one. Question two, what if the goal is to experience something better, something heightened by both of them? Could we actually have that in the search of yumminess? And I'm going to use the example of Sheila, Drew, and Nick. I'm not sure who did this for me, but they did a Lafroig or an Octomore fudge, and it might be both of them at one point. Okay, so, and that was fantastic. I loved it. So should we not drink and eat something if we're trying to find the notes of the whiskey? And two, should we not care and just throw caution in the wind and try everything just to see how they blend? I'm throwing that out to anyone out there. And Nick, I threw you under the bus with the dabbing thing, so you might as well talk first if you have a strong opinion.
I think you should try everything and just enjoy it and explore. Because why else are we doing this?
Well, I did the T to explore, and I was told to come up with something.
You can do it on your own. Again,
no.
Like the rest of the night, you know, it's gonna be...
No more tea, we're done.
This green spot Montelena with notes of sugar and lemon.
You know what? You guys talk about this. I'm going to try to make it balanced anyways, because we'll keep talking. Should we do it? Nick, I agree with you, but there's other people.
I do have a strong opinion about this. I think if you're trying anything, regardless if it's a certain type of food or a drink, you should have it plain first just to see what it's like. You know, like if you got served a plate of food, you would taste it before you add salt and pepper to it, right? Kind of the same thing. And at one time I went to a Michelin 3-star restaurant.
Yep.
And I ordered wine with the meal. And as a choice, rather than ordering a bottle of wine, you could order 3 glasses of wine to pair with your meal. And I had the sommelier choose for me because I didn't know what to choose, right? So I had the food. It was fantastic. And I had the wine and it blew my mind away. Like, you know, I could have matched something to go with the food, but I'm not trained like a professional sommelier. And it was just out of this world. So I think, like you said, if you just want to try the whiskey for the whiskey, just have the whiskey. If you want a different experience, try it with, you know, other things. I personally like smoked oysters with Isla whiskey. I think it's great.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, there's that smokiness, the seaweed taste to it. The oysters do leave like a oily taste in your mouth that kind of detracts from the whiskey a bit, but the overall effect is good, I think. So
excellent comment. Sorry, I have weird looks on my face because my tea got better with the lemon. I couldn't taste the sugar, so.
Oh, I thought you were imagining.
I would like that.
Jonathan Swift, great quote. You know, it was a brave man who first ate an oyster. You know, it's a strange taste on its own. But I'd agree. Like, if you don't like a pairing, it's not like the whiskey. Unless you're never going to get the whiskey again, it's obscenely difficult to find whiskey, and you only get to try it once, and you might want to try it on its own. But other than that, you know, it's still going to be there. It's not like you've irreparably barred yourself from experiencing both. You know, live a little. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a weird thing here with oysters. So we have the Guinness and oysters is a big thing in Ireland.
Oh,
stout.
really?
Yeah.
Oh.
There's actually a festival, one of the more fun festivals, the Galway Oyster Festival. But again, like they pair really eerily well. You know, Irish dry stout in general, and Guinness have kind of co-opted the whole thing. But these like odd mixtures, and yeah, does it mean every time you go to the pub you have to order a Guinness and oyster? No, but it's still fun and exploratory. Now, there's nobody, for all the like preciousness around Guinness, and I think Guinness, of all the mainstream beers, it's hard to be more precious about, a big company beer than people are about Guinness. But nobody, it's not anything close to whiskey where people say, oh, you're spoiling your Guinness or whatever. But the same applies where, have some fun, again, if it's a misfire, it's like Ratatouille. You remember the bit where he's like trying the different things? Sometimes there's bright colors and sometimes a bit of a blur and a muddy dud. But you have one and then have the, and big whoop. There's worse results, of experiment. So yeah, I'd firmly be in the camp of like, try everything once. Sometimes you strike lucky and do it again,
Perfect. Okay. And I was going to suggest something else, but I destroyed my palate right now with the lemon.
You were warned.
You were warned.
Yeah, I was, but the redbreast with the lemon wasn't so bad. But when I went to the green spot and the lemon tea just after, it was hideous. So and my next question was going to be, which one would have been better with salt? Because I just wanted someone to tell me if I was going to pair it with my salt chips that here, which one of the two I should have. But I've messed everything. Yeah. But it doesn't matter because it's the end of our hour. So it's that time, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a fantastic afternoon. Thanks to our listeners. Thanks to our panel all around me. Thanks to Drew, Sheila, Dave, Kent, Nick. It's been an absolute pleasure spending this afternoon with you. And special thanks to this con man on the side here. He's put up with us and told me to put down my tea, and that's okay. I don't take direction for too many people, but I'm okay with Finn and tell me what to do. It was fine. So, as always, and Jason, thanks for coming on. He almost didn't make it on. We were here. He was like a minute away from coming on, and he finally popped on. So, Jason, thanks for showing up and adding to the conversation, and especially the 3-star Michelin, because I didn't even think of that concept, and it really is. And I've had the same thing. So, thank you. That was perfect. That's it. Here's the good company. Everyone around me. Good company. Here's the good whiskey, the Redbreast, my favorite of the two so far today. Here's the good books, this one right here. And here's the good conversation, which we had all afternoon. And here's to see you all next week, Saturday, May 15th, 2021, 12 o'clock Mountain Daylight Time, 7 o'clock Irish Standard Time, because they don't do daylight savings there, for our Whiskey Book Club's 11th book review, A Glass Apart, Irish Single Pot Still Whiskey with author Fionnan O'Connor. Hit the like, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you all then. Have a fantastic day, and sláinte, everybody. Bye.